everyone. Today I am so excited to be talking to author H G Tudor. And he has more books than I can even list off. But he does have a YouTube channel called Knowing the Narcissist that I think I've read almost all his books and watched almost all his videos. And his website is amazing. He writes blogs on there. And thank you so much, HG. I'm so happy that you said yes, but I'm also terrified that you said yes. So.
Pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me, Michelle.
You have helped me so much in my life, and I'm sure you hear this over and over again, because those of us who know narcissists and who've had lives affected by them don't really, you can't really talk to them, or you can identify them and say, especially now, that's a term that's thrown around a lot, but you actually are so self-aware that you help people identify how a narcissist thinks. And I think that is so important, and I'm so grateful for your work.
You're welcome. It is invariably a lonely place that a victim of a narcissist finds him or herself. Naturally, much of that isolation is on purpose by the way that we manipulate our victims. But moreover, although there is a growing awareness about narcissism, there are still many, many people who do not understand it. And therefore, if you get to a point where you believe that you've been entangled with one of our kind, and you try to explain it to friends and family, unless they've been through it themselves, they try to understand, but invariably don't, and on many occasions will indeed proffer unhelpful advice based on that misunderstanding. So it's a lonely place in terms of the way that we've treated you, but it can be lonely in terms of gaining some understanding. And therefore, people have naturally found the resource that I've provided through my blog and my books and YouTube of considerable use, because they're finally gaining access to information that you would not find anywhere else.
Absolutely. I stumbled upon you on Facebook, and
Yes.
I became so intrigued that I went and started watching your videos a couple of months ago, and they were mind-blowing for me, because I was, I used to always think that my mom was a little bit, very selfish person. Okay.
Yes.
But my dad is he is a pedophile. He abused me from a very young age. But I used to tell people when I would tell my story, okay, I would say, you know what? It wasn't the physical abuse. It was the mental abuse. And people would look at me and be like, what does that mean? What does that mean? How could the mental abuse be worse? Well, I thought that I'd ask you to tell me, because you would know, like, the mental games that man played with me affected more of my life than anything he ever did physically.
Indeed. The use of manipulation, of course, is a staple part of what we do, and there are a variety of arenas within which that operates: sexual, financial, physical, and psychological, emotional. Now, of course, one can see that if a person has had money taken from them, or is not being provided with, for example, the maintenance that they were entitled following the dissolution of a marriage, one can see physical injuries, and therefore that enables third parties to be more sympathetic, and they can gain an understanding of what is going on, and indeed the victim can. They can see the fact that they're bruised and bloodied, or that, for instance, they recognize that they are being locked out of the house and denied somewhere to stay. With the psychological abuse, that is prevalent because there are so many different ways by which to deliver it. It also falls within the cloak of plausible deniability, which is a cornerstone of the way that we manipulate people, because we operate in a way that enables us to explain certain behaviors away. And of course, much of what we do is to cause you to enter a state whereby it's a downward spiral, as your sense of self and self-worth erodes, whereby through the gaslighting that takes place, you start to effectively lose your mind. And as we appear calm and controlled, you become all the more frenzied, frazzled, and hysterical. And therefore, when you try and explain to somebody what is happening, not only will they not understand because they are not familiar with narcissism, they cannot see a bruise, they cannot see a bloodied nose. All they see is a person who is convinced that their husband is playing with their mind, and he says this but does that. And of course what happens is the third party that listens to this falls into the trap of thinking it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. There will blame on both sides. Well, there isn't when you're entangled with a narcissist, but other people don't realise that. And furthermore, they will start to think, surely nobody is that bad, surely nobody would do that. And they will think, well, you might not be remembering it correctly, or you look exhausted, so it may be your mind playing tricks on you, or you're taking it out of context, or you're too sensitive. And because there is no visible measure of the abuse, then it becomes very difficult for people to believe the victim. And of course, what then happens is the victim doubts themselves further. And we, of course, select those individuals who are susceptible to being manipulated in this way in the first place. We identify people who effectively will self-flagellate, those that will invariably blame themselves. So when they find a situation, when things start to become unpleasant, when they are devalued by a narcissist, because they are an empathic individual and a truth seeker, they have to find a reason as to why this is happening. They don't know they're with a narcissist, so they cannot say, oh, he's treating me like this because I've wounded him, I have ignited his fury, and he's lashing out at me. That answer is not available to them at that stage. Instead, they clamour for some kind of answer, which would be, well, perhaps he's tired, or he's still grieving over his mother who died last month, or he's had a drink. And if they can't find that as a credible explanation, they will blame themselves. And you will find that there are individuals who have good careers, are intelligent, would be regarded as strong of character, and then find themselves in a situation when they look back that they were thinking that the reason that they were being treated so badly was ultimately it was their fault because they offered the narcissist raspberry jam rather than strawberry jam. And when they look back at it, they cannot believe that they became that person. But that is the extent of the psychological manipulations that can occur and are thus so much more damaging. And of course, what then follows from that is if you have a bruise, your body will heal. The healing of a person's mind is far harder because the infection that we cause in the individual and the victim's addiction to us means that they are often prevented from healing because they keep coming back to us, keep becoming ensnared, and never are able to distance themselves and control their own thinking, which allows them to heal and move on from what has happened to them.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, you know, when I look back, my dad died very young. He was 43. He was only 20 years older than me, so most of my life has been without him. But
yes,
what happened is in my life, and I'm sure that this happens to other people, is that once he, my first boyfriend was also my first husband, and then he took on that role. And when I was reading your stuff, I was trying to think, like, what was wrong with me at that? Like, what was my what was I getting from it? Like, I kept thinking, well, because I just love really hard. Like, I am just one of those people that once I love somebody, that's it, you know? But then I think back and I'm like, I don't know. I think that I was so confused by it or that it was so familiar. That personality was so familiar to me that I thought that I knew it or something. I don't know.
That's right. Those people that are susceptible to our kind are either those who are empathic, and it's those traits that call us to come calling, or you have individuals who are both empathic and what I describe as imprinted. And you'd be such as an individual. You're empathic to begin with, so that attracts a narcissist, means that you're susceptible to our overtures. that you are at a greater risk of being entangled and remaining entangled. But the imprinting that you suffered as a consequence of your childhood means that at an unconscious level, narcissism feels like home for you, that you are unconsciously chasing the storm that you always experienced at a younger age. And therefore, you are doubly at risk. And it's such individuals who, in essence, will always have to remain away from our kind, because if you so much as spend some time with us, your emotional thinking will surge to such a degree it will con you into continuing to engage with us, and you essentially lose control that way, because your emotional thinking basically bundles you onto a train and takes you to Narctown.
And you know, what's so intriguing about your work is that, you know, what I've always read about narcissists before was that you can't identify as one. You know, like but you have identified as one, and you actually are so self-aware that you can actually explain it to other people. And, you know, that is quite a gift, per se, you know.
It is. There are a number of people like myself who know what they are, but of course we wouldn't admit it in our private lives in order to maintain the control that is needed. And therefore, I am able to provide this information from a position of anonymity. I would never admit to anybody in my private life what I actually am. There are those who have suspected, and there are those who have been correct about it, but it's not something that I would offer them. And the bulk of narcissists have no insight. The lesser and mid-range narcissists, as I've categorized them, they don't know what they are and will not know what they are. Greaters do know. We're much rarer, and we see no reason to tell people because we don't want to cede control. But there are more people than you might realize who are aware of it, but of course not all are necessarily not minded to share the information the way that I have done. So I've done that because I do enjoy writing, but also when I learned more about what I actually am, and part of that was a growing awareness through the interaction that I've had with other people, I became aware that there were a lot of misconceptions about our kind. Many people were not describing us accurately. Indeed, they were describing certain information which was actually counterproductive. And I don't like inaccuracy in that respect. So I wanted to set the record straight. And as I've repeatedly explained to people, it appeals to my perverse sense of humour that I am globally weaponizing empaths to do something about their narcissists. So that fits in with the creation of my legacy. So.
Well, and you know what's interesting in my instance of having, you know, dealt with narcissists is, and only because you have defined them for me. I mean, that's what I'm so grateful about, is that if somebody would have asked me, you know, 2 years ago, what was wrong with your dad? It would be like, he'd be in this category of, well, he had a little bit of a drinking problem, and when he was drunk, it was a problem because then he abused me, and then that was a problem. But I didn't identify the personality disorder of him. But when I was reading your books, I was like, because that, first of all, that term wasn't around. It didn't fly around like it does now. You know, there was no term like that back in the 80s. And so that, in one instance, it's that. But and another, then it makes me feel sad for him, I guess I'd say, is that I always thought I had a lot of compassion for him, which is bizarre. But now I almost feel like I have more compassion because it seems like a thing he couldn't help. Does that make sense?
It does, and it is interesting when you see the reactions of various victims, because, and I see a lot of this through the blog, there are those who come and will say, I really appreciate the information you provided, you set me free. Indeed, I get emails from people saying, were it not for you, I would have taken my own life, because you finally helped me to understand what I've been dealing with and to put in place a constructive way of addressing it. And so there are many people who are hugely appreciative, but say, but I know full well what you are, and I would never ever want to meet you, which is a very sensible position to adopt. And then there are others who naturally come along and are insulting, and one understands that because they are hurt still, and they invariably regard me as some kind of poster boy at times for my kind, and therefore lash out at me even though they don't know me and I actually have never done anything to them. And so I understand that, and that provides me with a little bit of fuel, and sometimes they then go away. Other times they remain and then take on a more constructive approach to matters. And then there are some who will always condemn our kind because of the way that they've been treated and the way they've been suffered, and there is hatred there, which again is understandable, and there is no desire to forgive. And then, of course, there are others like yourselves that fall within the very compassionate group that basically realise that our kind have invariably suffered some form of abuse ourselves and are damaged in a different way, and this is the way that we have been created, if you will, in order to cope with that and recognise that there is the creation of an individual which has arisen as a self-defence mechanism, and one ought not to chastise that behaviour, abhorrent as it is regarded, but rather to realise this is the situation that has occurred for this individual, and that is the way that they have found with coping with it, and that in a way perhaps sympathy, pity, compassion might be exhibited towards a narcissist. And of course you have this broad spectrum of reactions to it, all of which are entirely understandable.
Right. Well, that kind of makes sense, because I always think that that I was getting something by feeling bad for him, like, or and even my ex-husband, I think, well, do I get, is there some kind of martyrdom that I am expressing? Is that where we go? And reading your books has really helped me with that. And I really, anybody out there who's going through this, I highly suggest reading your books, because they really, really do help. And when you say like people get mad at you, I think, well, that's kind of funny, because it doesn't really bother you if you're
well, no, as I always say, love me, hate me, just never ignore me. So if you want to come to my blog and say, dear Mr. Tudor, you're a disgusting human being and you ought to be taken out the back and shot, that doesn't concern me in the slightest. I don't care. All you've done is give me a little bit of fuel, but it's from a tertiary source, a stranger. Therefore, it's neither here nor there. And they will get bored of insulting me before I do. And they're not going to cause me to react, because there are those that also are looking to try and make me react in a particular way, and they're going to be disappointed because I'm above doing so with an individual, and I know what they're doing anyway, so I'm not going to fall victim to that kind of behaviour. And what I've tried to do is, with narcissism, of course, there is the definition that's contained within the DSM. And one has to remember that this is a definition that has been applied by a prevailing group of people who, of course, have obtained qualifications through their studies in terms of psychiatry and psychology. And their body has ascertained that there are a variety of mental health issues and disorders and categorised them. And that is the benchmark standard. Yes. However, for many people, if they are taken to that, they can kind of work out what it means. But there is this disconnect between what they might see described in the DSM or other such publications that you described in more esoteric and scientific terms, and what they are actually experiencing. What I sought to do as an effective communicator, and the fact, of course, I am not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I have no training in those disciplines whatsoever. I understand what I am. I know how I operate. I know how my kind operate, because there are narcissists in my family, my social life, in my workplace. And by years of observing and listening to both narcissists and their victims, I've accumulated all of this knowledge, and therefore have conveyed it in a way which is applicable to the situation that you find yourself in. So many times it will be, for example, I don't understand why he will not answer my text messages for days on end. What's all that about? And of course, that in itself does not mean that you're involved with a narcissist, but it is an indicative behaviour of somebody who is a narcissist. Because a healthy person would answer your text message in a reasonably expedient period of time. And all of these various instances in terms of why is it that he seems to lose his temper over nothing, Why is it whenever I make a particular request, I don't get any response to it? And why is it that he suddenly disappears and never contacts me? Why does he flirt with other people? All of these instances are manifestations, invariably, of narcissistic behaviors. And by explaining it in the ways that people see and experience in their lives, it then makes it far easier for them, A, to identify it, and B, to understand it. And thereafter, they can then, by looking at the aggregate of these behaviors, and indeed in consultation with me, ascertain, yes, this individual is a narcissist, and then take the appropriate action thereafter, rather than be trying to read something which, whilst naturally is scientifically accurate, is difficult to apply to the experience you're involved in. And also, and this is a particular bugbear of mine, those that describe narcissistic behaviours but call them something else, which normalise and euphemize the behaviour. So where you get these so-called relationship experts who say, oh, he's a commitment phobe, or he's just not that into you, or he's got an anger management problem, or he's a sex addict. It's all nonsense. All of those are invariably manifestations of disordered behaviour and usually narcissistic in nature. And so they will say to these people, well, what you need to do is you need to back off and let him come to you, and then when he comes to you, you can embrace the relationship. No, this person's a narcissist. If you back off, yes, we may well pursue, dependent on what our other interests are in terms of gathering fuel. But if we then come after you and you embrace us, we've ensnared you. But you're now ensnared with a narcissist, and it's not going to be healthy for you. So that relationship, that so-called relationship expert has just given you duff advice.
Yeah, because I used to always think, in my kind of unhealthy way, it's like if I would have come to you and said, you know what, I have this boyfriend and he wants to get married, and I think he may be a narcissist. I can't tell. There's things going on with him, but you know what? I think I can love him out of it. I think he just needs me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think he just needs my kind of love, which is completely different than anybody else's kind of love. And I'm just going to be there for him, no matter what he's going to go through. And what kind of advice do you give to that? Like, go the other way, run fast?
Well, anybody who says that, I basically explain to them, I understand why you're saying that. And what's happening here is it's your emotional thinking conning you. You know that you're with a narcissist. That means that this individual will control you. Dependent on where you fit into their fuel matrix, you may see them periodically and they treat you very well, and then you won't hear from them for weeks on end. And then they'll get in contact with you again and you'll have a lovely weekend together. Or they may pursue you with considerable vigour, marry you, give you a wonderful time, make you the spouse, what I call the intimate partner primary source, and then devalue you, and you have a tumultuous time, and then at some point disengage from you after they've found somebody else to ensnare instead. So you're with a narcissist. So whatever role they allocate to you, it is not going to be a healthy situation for you to be in, and indeed could be a very dangerous one. So why do you think that you would still want to engage with somebody, given that I tell you now, this person can't change, won't change, and no matter what you think you can do, it's not going to be in your best interests. And what happens is their emotional thinking, because it's the con artist, will keep saying to them, yes, but if I just keep doing this, surely he will. And all I'll say to them is, no, he's a narcissist. You don't want to have anything to do with him. That's the logic. And some people don't get it because their emotional thinking is so high, it swamps them. And they don't realize that this is their emotional thinking all of the time conning them. The emotional thinking wants you to engage with the narcissist, and it will come up with any excuse that it can for that to happen. Sometimes it's go and find out why he's dumped you. He didn't give any reasons. You need to talk to him to find out. Well, if you know that person's a narcissist, you don't have to go and find out. Come and ask me and I'll tell you why he did it. But you don't need to engage with him. Or it will say to you, have you seen who he's now with? He's with her, that piece of trash, after he was with you. What's all that about? You've got to ask him what he sees in her and not you. No, you don't. Or it might be the guy is a complete bastard. Ring him up and give him both barrels and tell him what a shit he's been towards you. All of those instances are emotional thinking trying to keep you engaging with us, be it through trying to sort things out, trying to heal us, trying to work out what's gone wrong, trying to show compassion, or even being angry with us. When you realize somebody's a narcissist, get out and stay out. You don't have to have anything more to do with that individual. But of course, the emotional thinking will say to you, but he might change, or, well, actually, he's come back and he has changed a few things. So obviously he's trying. Yes, because he's manipulating you again, and your emotional thinking is falling for it. And what you have to do, the only way that you can get your emotional thinking under control is to stay away from us, because each time you engage with us, we keep infecting you again, and your addiction to us remains, and so your emotional thinking remains in control of you. And the more that you think and allow your emotional thinking to manifest, what then happens thereafter is that you keep getting stuck within that emotional thinking. However, if you stay away from the source of infection, so you then purge it, you then build your logic defenses so that in due course, when we try to hoover you, and invariably we will, you will A, see that it's a hoover, B, train yourself to respond with logic, which will say to you, the narcissist is back, he's trying to ensnare me, I don't want that. If you don't train yourself to apply your logic, what will happen is you'll be hoovered and you will go, oh, it feels so good that he's got in touch with me. I've missed him so much. He's being really nice. Oh, this is so good. Things have been so awful. I will call him back. Oh, he wants me to go and meet him. Well, that would be really nice to see him again. I've missed him. And this is your emotional thinking. It's got hold of you and it's telling you to do all of these things which are contrary to your interest.
Yeah, I do find that is so beautifully said, because I do find myself now today knowing this about me because of your stuff, that
yes.
if it doesn't feel good, it probably isn't.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to be logical, and I have to trust that. I have to trust that logic over my emotion. It's like, wait, and I have to really, really, for me, and I don't know about other people, but for me, it's very difficult to trust logic over emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to really apply it in my everyday. It's like, wait, that doesn't, logically. Okay, logically, does it make sense to you? No. Okay, don't emotion it away. Don't say, well, he had a bad day, or he did this, or this is
That's
happening.
right.
Like
You've also got to be careful, however, that your emotional thinking can manifest as a form of logic. For example, let us say you have a victim who is physically attractive, has a very good career, financially well off, and was with the narcissist for 10 years, lived in a huge house and had a very good standard of living, lots of friends. And then the narcissist has left that person and is with somebody who is not as physically attractive, has a fairly mundane job, doesn't have the high standard of living. Anybody who would observe that would say, why have you given all of that up to go be with that person? That doesn't make sense. And therefore, you see a logic in coming back to this particular individual. However, what is happening, of course, is that you've been painted black, and therefore, even if you were the richest person in the world, it's not going to do you any good, because this other person is painted white, and it's the golden period, and everything they do, everything they touch turns gold, they walk on water. And what happens is your perspective of the world being different from ours, because we have a narcissistic perspective, means that something appears logical to you, but even so, it is still dangerous for you to apply that, because it's your logic, not understanding our logic. And therefore, what you have to get yourself in a position is of applying the cool, hard logic. And the cool, hard logic is, for example, this person is a narcissist. Then this means he will not change. This means whatever he does for his benefit and not for mine. It means it is not healthy. It means I don't have to have anything to do with them. Those are instances of cool, hard logic. And of course, emotional thinking would say to you, well, he's not so bad. And so if I try and assert some boundaries with him and say, look, I just want to be friends, then I think I've learned things now. I think I can control the relationship. That's your emotional thinking pawning you, because you can't. Because what will happen is you will then try and engage with us, you will try and assert those boundaries, and you will fail, because we will ensnare you again. And your emotional thinking has just laid a trap for you to cause you to think that you can handle us.
Yes. Yes, I get that. That makes so much sense. I really kind of I get that. So anyway, on your YouTube channel, you did some amazing videos on what's going on currently in the movie business, movie industry at the moment. And and I loved it because I was a huge Kevin Spacey fan. Okay. So when that first came out, and here I am, I can walk around and say, I have been abused as a child, and somebody says something about somebody else. And I'm like, right away, my empathy goes towards not the child, but the abuser. Okay. Which is bizarre. I mean, it is the most bizarre thing. I can see it, but I still think it's bizarre. But anyway, his statement comes out and I'm like, that doesn't sound right. I don't know why that doesn't sound right. It just, something about it. And then I listened to your video and you just rip into every sentence of why it didn't feel good and why we should be careful about why it didn't feel good, And it's a real big service what you're doing. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, the fact that you can identify it and you can say, look, what this guy's statement said was all about him. It wasn't about anybody else.
That's right. Again, it is looking at these matters in aggregate, because you can identify a behaviour, and of course, with certain behaviours, you can interpret in often one of two ways. So you look for all of the various indicators, and then they, in themselves, create a pattern and a clear impression. And with what we've seen with Kevin Spacey and with Harvey Weinstein, people have talked about predators, abuse, sex addiction, all of these things. But from anything that I've read in the news reports, narcissism was never mentioned. And that's what's clearly behind it all. And that's why I provided the analysis, so that people understand, first of all, what is driving this behaviour, and that we are far more prevalent than people realise. And of course, there are those who are narcissists and those who have narcissistic tendencies. But ultimately, with the examples that are provided, those are two clear examples of two narcissists, but people wouldn't see it. And again, people have talked about, with Weinstein, saying, oh, yeah, he's a predator, but he's a sex addict. Mm-hmm. He's an addict. He's addicted to fuel, and he just happens to get that through sex. So it's not really being a sex addict. It's a narcissist who's addicted to the fuel, and his modus operandi is obtaining it through sex. But people miss this point. And if people, A, knew more about it, then they would be able to recognize our kind more readily, and then they would be able to protect themselves. But so many reports that you will read, and I see it time and time again, that so many behaviours of individuals, it's narcissism at work, and it's missed. And if people realised what it was and understood more about it, it would enable them to have a much better handle on how to deal with these matters, be it romantically, in family, socially, or even in terms of business. And through the consultations that I engage with, the bulk, of course, often people wanting to understand what has happened in a romantic entanglement. So, was I with a narcissist? And it is important to know that you were with one as you were not with one. And then, why did this person do this? Why did they do that? What's going to happen next? How do I best deal with it? All of those types of things. And then some involve family members. But I've started increasingly having people consult with me wanting assistance because they now realise that the difficult opponent in a legal case, or the awkward opponent in a deal, or that boss at work are narcissists, or they suspect that and they want the confirmation. And then it provides them with the better tools by which to deal with it. And so many people do not realise that in many situations in their life, they think this person, he's just downright awkward or a pain in the ass. And he just is argumentative all of the time, and we can't get things done. And they don't realise that it's highly likely that individual is a narcissist. And once they do, they can then equip themselves with the means of dealing with it, which is either get away from that person so you have nothing to do with them, so they can't impact on you. If you have to have some dealing with them, you can work around the issue so that you can try and secure the most appropriate outcome and or minimise the impact on you in terms of their behaviour.
Right, and you make a great point in most of your books, but in the ones that I have read, is that people will say to somebody like me, like, well, if you know he's a narcissist, I mean, if you've identified him as a narcissist, what would be attractive about that? Well, first of all, narcissists in a general sense are very self-assured. They're like running for office. Okay, it doesn't matter what they look like. It's about how they project themselves. And that in itself is attractive to somebody like me for some reason that I don't understand. But I do, like my dad, somebody would, even if somebody knew that what he did to me, they would be like, but he's awesome. I don't know. It was this very strange, reaction that I'd get from people like, your dad, but he's great. What are you talking about? He was the funniest guy I knew. He was the most, I loved him.
Well, indeed. And of course, there are various schools and subdivisions of narcissists, and you will get some narcissists who are out and out unpleasant people that regularly get into fights, don't work, and are quite sort of the caveman in behaviour, and are just generally regarded as an unpleasant and despicable person. Then many narcissists are either quite brilliant individuals who, without their narcissism, actually wouldn't be anywhere near as successful as they are. And as we all know, narcissism can bring about fantastic results. It will result in that desire to be better than anybody else, so utterly committed to the profession or sport or artistic genre within which it's operated, to create fantastic paintings, works of art, create a business and run a magnificent business, make those difficult decisions which ensure the defence of a country, not be concerned about the brickbats that are thrown at people, so that the sensitive individual who's shrinking violet is not going to be of much assistance when it comes to the tough decisions dealing with the defence of the realm. And therefore, there are many, many excellent things that arise out of narcissists, even ones whereby, on an individual basis, we can be distinctly horrible and unpleasant to people. And then you have those that have strong narcissistic tendencies who are not narcissists, but so they will have some empathy, who perhaps are pop stars, so they entertain a lot of people. And in order to get up on that stage and perform, they've got to have strong narcissistic tendencies. But by the same token, they can be caring with people also. And then, of course, you have another flavour of narcissist, who's an example that you've referred to, whereby many people expect that the burglar is somebody who's going to be wandering along wearing a striped jumper and a mask and a swag bag over their shoulder, and the paedophile is the creepy guy in stained mac with greasy lank hair hanging around a children's playground. Well, they're not, because in order for any kind of abuser to be effective, we've got to mix in, we've got to fit in, and therefore there will always be outliers. But when it comes down to the comments that you often hear, he was such a quiet person, I didn't think he had it in him, or we never realised that somebody like that would do something like that, he was always very pleasant. Well, of course, because in order to fit in, and it is a part of certain narcissists that have this inherent desire to be accepted and also seen as a good person because they actually think they are a good person, they will fit in very well. They will maintain this facade. They will be a pillar of the community. They will attend church. They will assist with charities. And then there will be this dark side. And invariably, it may be their spouse is the only one who ever is on the receiving end of that, or the children. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's the occasional friend who has stepped out of line that gets the corrective devaluation and complains to somebody else. And is the reaction you've just described, what, Dougie? I've never been like that with me. Are we talking about the same person? But he does all of these wonderful things. No, I can't believe he would ever do that. And of course, that's all part of how we're able to operate, because people won't accept that there is this dark side and therefore start to doubt the victim, because they think, well, we just see the really good side of them. And that's all part and parcel of it.
Yes. Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, I can't thank you enough for the work that you've done, because I really don't feel as insane as I did before. And I'm sure you get that a lot from people. Like you said, people write to you and say, like, I thought it was me. I thought I was the problem. And for somebody like me who was actually raised or, with it around them. And, I did always think it was my problem. I did always think I was the issue. And now, how many years later, he died in 1988, I can look back and say, okay, I was a kid. I wasn't the issue here. Okay. And I can maybe see my way out of this. And I am, and I'm 53 now, and I think I can. I think I feel a little bit more capable, and and it's because of you. So I really want to thank you for everything that you've done. I'm so happy that you love to write, because your blogs are amazing. I mean, not only do you have your blogs, but you have so many books. I was trying to count them. Do you know how many books you have?
43.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm currently working on, although I haven't managed to publish another book for about a year because of my professional demands of my private life, and also the demands of the blog, etc. But I've got another 55 which are in progress, which will hopefully start to make an appearance soon, because I work. I can only dedicate a certain amount of time, obviously, for dealing with them, and therefore I work on one and move that one forward, and then move another one forward, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot more yet for me to explain and tell and convey to people. So there's plenty more material yet to be provided. So.
Yeah, that's what I keep thinking. I wonder if he's going to run out of material. Like, is there a
No. There are so many elements to it, because not only is there explaining to you the way that we operate and we think, there is also, though many of my readers are interested, of course, in my background, my childhood, the relationship I have with my mother, for instance, which forms parts of certain books which are in progress. And then there are certain arenas that I will be writing about, for example, dealing with the narcissist in work, divorcing a narcissist, or, the narcissist and money, lots of different topics there. And then as my awareness continues to increase, there are further revelations that I have, which I can then share. Mm-hmm. And then there is commenting, of course, in terms of how narcissism impacts on the world as a whole. And we touched on earlier some current examples. So there is always plenty to write and explain. And the only frustration really is there are not enough hours in the day for me, and I've only got one pair of hands, so I can't get the material out quick enough. Well, so
last question before we go. I mean, do you think that you were born that way? Is it something, like, first of all, the fact that you are self-aware. I mean, that is a huge gift. Okay. But did you always feel like it was something you couldn't help? Or do you think, I don't know, what is your take on that?
The creation of what I am is a consequence of a genetic predisposition to being this way, and the abuse that I suffered as a child. And then thereafter, I'm reliably informed that my narcissism would have occurred at a particular stage in my life. I recall deciding that I was not going to... I remember seeing the power that was exhibited by my mother, and I distinctly remember thinking, I want that too. And therefore, that formed a watershed moment to a degree, although I do understand that by that stage I was already well within the grip of my narcissism, and that was perhaps just a further manifestation of it, whereby I recognized that there was this power to be grabbed, if you will, and copied. And thereafter, the manipulation continued. I always realized that I was different and special to other people. I always felt this need to control people, to own them, to draw them into my world and make them mine, to puppet them. But of course, I didn't know there was a term for it. Mm-hmm. And it was only after university that one of my former girlfriends, who was a psychology graduate, explained to me that she believed that I was both a narcissist and a psychopath. And of course, I denied it. But some of the behaviors she described, I could see what she was driving at. And being somebody who is both very clever and enjoys intellectual stimulation and needs to know, because that's a part of the manifestation of the need for control, I went away and read, and I could see how it started to fit together. And so I now had a name for what I was. And I recognized also it was not something that was to be bandied around, but I recognized that it was a distinct advantage. And therefore I continued to utilize it to my advantage. And more latterly, as a consequence of the engagement with the good doctors, I've learned more about why I behave this way. It has increased my awareness, and I've bolted that onto the existing awareness that I had to then create a position of increased awareness, increased effectiveness, and understanding both of myself and those of my kind.
Well, I just want to thank you for everything you have done, and for all the people that you're helping. And I will continue to watch your videos. I will put all the links for your Amazon page and your YouTube channel and your blog, of course. And I just want to thank you. And I can't wait to see what you have coming up next, because I will be reading it and watching.
I'm pleased to hear that. Thank you for doing so, and a pleasure speaking to you.
Yes, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Yep, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.